Chapter 1, The Uneven Table. Daryl Jones first noticed the problem on a Tuesday night that felt aggressively ordinary. The kind of night that shouldn't matter. The kind of night that, if everything were fine, would slide into memory and dissolve somewhere between dinner and sleep. They were sitting at the small table in Tina's apartment, the one pressed against the window that overlooked a parking lot and a struggling maple tree. Daryl had assembled the table himself a year earlier, kneeling on the floor while Tina read the instructions upside down and laughed every time he asked for the Allen wrench. Tonight, the table felt narrower. Tina was talking about work, about Marissa from accounting, who had accidentally replied all to an email complaining about management, and about how everyone was going out Friday to celebrate surviving another quarter. Her fork hovered midair as she talked, animated, confident, glowing with the ease of someone fully inside her own life. "They're doing this rooftop place downtown," Tina said. "Apparently the drinks are ridiculous. Like, edible flowers ridiculous." Daryl smiled when it felt appropriate. He nodded at the right moments. He knew how to be good at this. "That sounds fun," he said. "It is," she agreed quickly, then corrected herself. "I mean, it will be." She went back to her pasta. Daryl waited. Not for an invitation, exactly. He didn't need one. He'd learned a long time ago that wanting something didn't mean demanding it. Still, he waited for acknowledgement. Some sign that the future she was narrating had space for him in it. It didn't come. Instead, Tina launched into a story about last Friday. How she and her coworkers had ended up at a bar she'd never mentioned before. How someone danced on a chair. How they closed the place down. "You would have hated it," she said, laughing. "So loud. No place to sit." Daryl smiled again, but this one came slower. "Yeah," he said. "Probably. The thing was, he wouldn't have hated it. He didn't love loud bars, sure, but he loved being included. He loved seeing her in motion, loved learning the shape of her world by standing inside it with her." He twirled pasta around his fork, appetite fading. They'd been together 2 years. 2 full years of dinners, weekends, holidays negotiated politely between families. 2 years of showing up, of choosing each other consistently. At least that's how Daryl had understood it. He wasn't a jealous man. He'd never been interested in control. When they started dating, he'd made a conscious decision not to restrict her world to fit him inside it. People behaved differently when they felt observed. Anyone could perform commitment under pressure. He wanted to know who Tina was when she was free. Now, sitting at that table, he wondered if he'd mistaken freedom for absence. Tina checked her phone and smiled at something on the screen. "Marissa just sent pictures from last weekend," she said. "Oh my God. I look exhausted." Daryl leaned over instinctively, but Tina angled the phone away slightly. Not deliberately, just naturally, like a habit formed without thought. She laughed again, alone this time. Something in Daryl's chest shifted. Not sharply, not painfully, just enough to be noticeable. He cleared his throat. "Hey," he said. "Can I ask you something?" Tina looked up. "Sure. When you talk about your life," he said carefully, "the parts you seem happiest about, I'm usually not in them." The words sat between them, heavier than he'd intended. Tina blinked. "What? I mean," Daryl continued, keeping his tone even conversational. "You talk about work stuff, your friends, trips you're thinking about, and I'm not there. Not in the stories. Not in the plans." Tina frowned slightly. "That's not true, isn't it?" She crossed her arms. "I talk about you all the time. That's not what I mean." "Then what do you mean?" Daryl took a breath. He wasn't trying to accuse her. He was trying to understand something that had been quietly accumulating for months, like dust in corners he hadn't checked. "I feel like I exist in a separate lane," he said. "Like I'm not part of the life you're excited about. I'm adjacent to it." Tina stared at him, expression shifting from confusion to defensiveness. "You're reading way too much into this," she said. "I'm allowed to have my own life." "I know," Daryl said quickly. "I want you to. That's not the issue." "Then what is?" He hesitated. That was the problem. The issue didn't have a clean name yet. "I don't know if I'm your partner," he said finally. "Or your fallback." Silence settled between them, thick and awkward. "That's unfair," Tina said. "I've never treated you like a fallback. I'm not saying you're doing it on purpose. That doesn't make it better." Daryl nodded. "I know." She pushed her plate away, appetite clearly gone now. "So what?" she said. "You want me to stop going out? Start dragging you everywhere?" "No," he said immediately. "God, no. I just want to know if you see me in your future the way I see you in mine." Tina's gaze dropped to the table. She traced a groove in the wood with her fingertip. "I don't think about the future like that," she said. Daryl felt something inside him settle. Not relief, not pain, recognition. "That's what I was afraid of," he said quietly. Tina looked up. "So now what?" He didn't have an answer yet. He only knew that waiting indefinitely for alignment wasn't patience anymore. It was avoidance. Outside, a car alarm chirped and stopped. The maple tree rustled in the breeze. Another ordinary night. Except now, Daryl couldn't unsee the uneven table between them. Chapter 2. The room without him. Friday arrived the way it always did. too quickly with the false promise of relief. Daryl finished work early, not because anyone told him to, but because there was nothing left that required his attention. He shut down his computer, packed his bag, and stood for a moment in the quiet office, aware of how easily he could picture the rest of his evening. Tina wouldn't be home until late. Rooftop bar, edible flowers, co-workers he'd never met and apparently didn't need to. He hadn't been uninvited. That was the maddening part. The night had simply formed without him, like a closed loop he was never meant to enter. He drove to her apartment anyway. Not to wait exactly, he wasn't that guy, but because he'd left a jacket there and because, despite everything, it still felt like the place he should be on a Friday night. Tina's apartment was quiet when he arrived. He hung his jacket back in the closet, straightened a throw pillow he hadn't realized was crooked, and sat on the couch with his phone resting uselessly in his hand. At 8:30, she texted. Just got here. This place is wild, grinning face with smiling eyes. Daryl stared at the screen longer than necessary before replying. Have fun. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. I will. He set the phone down. He didn't stew. He didn't spiral. He cooked himself a simple dinner, watched half an episode of a show he didn't care about, and went to bed at a reasonable hour. He told himself this was what trust looked like. Space. Independence. Still, he woke when the front door clicked open at nearly 1 in the morning. Tina came in flushed and buzzing, shoes in her hand, hair pulled loose from its clip. She smelled like citrus and alcohol and night air. She leaned down and kissed his cheek, missing his mouth by an inch. You're asleep, she whispered, though he was clearly awake. Not anymore, he said, smiling despite himself. She laughed softly and collapsed onto the bed beside him. That place was insane, she said. We ended up staying way longer than we meant to. Sounds like it, Daryl said. She rolled onto her side, propping herself up on one elbow. You should have seen Marissa try to flirt with the bartender. It was painful. Daryl waited. And then Tyler spilled a drink on some woman who turned out to be his boss's boss, Tina continued. I thought he was going to pass out. That's impressive, Daryl said. Oh, and guess who showed up? Claire from marketing. You know, the one I told you about? The one who hates spreadsheets. I remember, he said, though he didn't. Not really. She kept talking. Story after story. Names stacked on names. Moments layered so vividly they almost felt cinematic. Almost. Daryl noticed the pattern before he could stop himself. Every anecdote placed her squarely in the center. Laughing, reacting, moving. While the rest of the room stayed crowded with people he didn't know, didn't exist to him beyond labels. There was no empty chair where he might have fit. Eventually, Tina slowed. The adrenaline drained from her voice. Sorry, she said, yawning. I'm rambling. It's okay, Daryl said. You had fun. I did. She smiled. It was exactly what I needed. Something about that landed wrong. Exactly what she needed, and he hadn't been part of it. She snuggled closer, already halfway to sleep. You're quiet, she murmured. Just tired, he said. She hummed in acknowledgement and drifted off. Daryl lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her stories in his head. Not out of jealousy, but out of curiosity. He tried to imagine himself there. Tried to picture how he'd move through that space, how he'd talk to her coworkers, how he'd watch her laugh with a drink in her hand. The image wouldn't form. It wasn't that she hid him. It was worse. She didn't need him. The next morning, Tina woke late and cheerful, still riding the echo of the night before. She made coffee, humming, and scrolled through her phone while Daryl leaned against the counter. Look at this, she said, turning the screen toward him. A group photo filled the display, faces pressed together, lights blurring behind them. Tina was front and center, smiling wide. Daryl leaned in politely. You look happy, he said. I was, she replied easily. He studied the photo longer than necessary. Everyone looked like they belonged to the same story. He wasn't jealous of the people. He was jealous of the ease. So, Tina said, setting the phone down, I was thinking of doing brunch with the girls tomorrow. Okay, Daryl said. And then next weekend Marissa wants to do a wine tasting thing. It's kind of last minute. That sounds fun. Tina hesitated. It's mostly a work crowd. Daryl nodded slowly. Of course it is. She frowned. Why are you saying it like that? Like what? Like it means something. He sighed, rubbing his face. Tina, he said. Do you ever miss me when I'm not around? The question surprised them both. She blinked. What? Not in a dramatic way, he clarified. Just, do you ever wish I were there when you're out doing things you enjoy? She looked genuinely confused. I mean, sometimes? The pause before sometimes stretched longer than the word itself. I think, she said carefully, you and I just enjoy different things. That's fine, Daryl said. Different isn't the issue. Then what is? He searched her face, hoping to find something he could anchor to. I don't feel woven into your life, he said. I feel scheduled. That's not fair, she said again, sharper this time. Isn't it? She crossed her arms. You're the one who said you didn't want to be glued at the hip. I said I didn't want to control you. That's the same thing. No, it's not. She shook her head. You're making this way bigger than it needs to be. Maybe, Daryl said quietly, but it's been building for a while. Tina exhaled, frustrated. So what do you want from me? He answered honestly. I want to know that, when you imagine the parts of your life that matter, I'm in the picture without having to ask. The room fell silent. Tina looked away first. I don't think about things like that, she said. I just live. Daryl nodded, the last piece clicking into place. I think that's the difference, he said. She looked back at him. What difference? I'm building, he said. And you're experiencing. Neither was wrong. But they weren't the same. The coffee maker clicked off, filling the space with sudden quiet. Tina picked up her mug. I don't want to fight. I don't either, Daryl said. But as she turned away, already mentally moving on, he understood something with uncomfortable clarity. He wasn't in her room. He was standing just outside it, close enough to hear the laughter, never close enough to belong. Chapter 3 lines drawn in pencil. Sunday afternoon found them walking through the farmer's market like nothing had changed. That was the strange part. From the outside, they looked intact. Comfortable steps, familiar rhythm. Tina pausing to examine flowers while Daryl held their place in line for coffee. If anyone were watching, they'd see a couple who knew each other well enough not to cling. Inside, Daryl felt like he was holding something fragile without knowing where the cracks were. Do we need bread? Tina asked, already drifting toward a stall with hand-painted signs. We have half a loaf, Daryl said. That's basically nothing. That's basically still bread. She smiled at him over her shoulder, amused. He smiled back automatically. They bought bread. They wandered past produce and jars of honey. Tina chatted easily with a vendor she recognized. Daryl stood beside her, hands in his pockets, nodding along. It occurred to him, not for the first time, that he could disappear from this moment and very little would need adjusting. They sat at a small metal table with their coffee and pastries. The market buzzed around them, cheerful and aimless. Tina broke off a piece of croissant. So, she said casually, my mom asked if we're coming to her place for her birthday next month. Daryl looked up. She did. Yeah. I told her I wasn't sure yet. He waited. Well, she continued, because I don't know what my schedule will look like. Next month, he said. She shrugged. Work's unpredictable. Daryl took a sip of coffee, buying time. I'd like to go, he said. Okay, Tina replied, still casual. We'll see. There it was again. We'll see. Pencil lines where ink should have been. Tina, he said, setting his cup down. Can we talk about something? She sighed. Not dramatically, but with the practiced weariness of someone who sensed direction and didn't love it. Is this going to be heavy? Not if you don't make it heavy. She smiled thinly. That's reassuring. I'm serious. So am I. Daryl leaned back in his chair. He didn't want to ambush her. He wanted just once, to put the thing between them where they could both see it clearly. When you think about your life, he said, what do you want it to look like in, say, 5 years? Tina laughed. Oh my God, is this a job interview? No, because that's exactly how it sounds. Just humor me. She considered, chewing thoughtfully. I don't know, she said. Successful. Happy. Not bored. Where? Where what? Where do you imagine living? She tilted her head. Somewhere cool. Cool how? Fun. Interesting. Somewhere I'm not stuck. Daryl nodded. Do you see me there? The question landed softly. Tina's smile faltered. I don't think about it like that, she said again. I know, Daryl said. That's why I'm asking. She crossed her legs, posture shifting from relaxed to guarded. Why do we have to plan everything? She asked. Why can't we just see where things go? Because seeing where things go still means going somewhere. That's your opinion. No, he said gently. That's how time works. Tina rolled her eyes, but there was tension under the humor. You're always talking about timelines, she said. It's exhausting. I'm not asking you to pick a wedding date. I know, but it always feels like you're measuring me against something. I'm measuring us. Well, I don't want to be measured. Daryl frowned. Why not? Because I don't want to fail a test I didn't agree to take. He exhaled slowly. This isn't a test. It's clarity. To you. To anyone who wants to build a life. She bristled. So now I don't want a life? That's not what I said. It's what you're implying. Daryl rubbed his thumb along the edge of the table. He could feel the conversation slipping, becoming about tone instead of truth. I'm not saying you're wrong for wanting what you want, he said. I'm saying I need to know if what you want has room for me. Tina stared at him. You're right here. I don't mean physically. Well, I don't know how to answer that, she said sharply. I'm 28, Daryl. I don't have everything figured out. I don't either, he said. But I know what direction I'm facing. And I don't want to pick a direction just to make you comfortable. The words stung more than he expected. This isn't about comfort, he said. It's about commitment. She scoffed. We've been together 2 years. How much more committed do you want me to be? He hesitated, then decided honesty was better than caution. I want to feel chosen, he said. The market noise swelled around them, filling the silence. I chose you, Tina said, quieter now. You choose me on Tuesday nights, he replied. On weekends when nothing else is happening. That's not fair. I know it sounds harsh, but it's how it feels. She stared at her hands. I just don't think relationships should feel like obligations. They shouldn't, Daryl agreed. They should feel like priorities. Her jaw tightened. You're asking me to change, she said. I'm asking you to show me who you already are. That's the same thing. No, it isn't. She shook her head. You say you don't want to control me, but everything you're saying feels like pressure. Daryl felt a flicker of frustration. You think wanting to be included is control? I think wanting certainty is. He laughed softly, humorless. Then what are we doing? Dating, she said. And after that? She shrugged. Living. Separately? That's not what I said. But you didn't say together. She looked up at him then, eyes searching his face. You're always 5 steps ahead, she said. I'm just trying to enjoy where I am. And I'm afraid that where you are doesn't include me long term. She was quiet for a long moment. I don't want to promise something I might not be able to give, she said finally. Daryl nodded. There it was. Not cruel. Not malicious. Just honest. I appreciate that, he said. She frowned. You do. Yes, he said. I just need to decide what that means for me. Her shoulders stiffened. So this is an ultimatum. No, he said. It's a boundary. That sounds like the same thing with better branding. He almost smiled. Almost. They gathered their things in silence, walked back to the car without touching. When Daryl dropped Tina off, she leaned over and kissed his cheek, lingering as if that might smooth the edges of the conversation. We're okay, she said. He met her eyes. Are we? She hesitated, then smiled again, quick, practiced. Don't overthink it. She closed the door and walked inside. Daryl sat in the car for a long moment after, hands resting uselessly on the steering wheel. He realized something then, with a clarity that was almost peaceful. Tina wasn't unwilling to commit. She was unwilling to imagine. And Daryl couldn't build a future in pencil. Chapter 4. The wrong kind of patience. Daryl didn't tell anyone right away. Not because there was nothing to tell, but because explaining it required a level of certainty he didn't yet possess. Nothing had exploded. Nothing had ended. The relationship still technically existed, which made the ache harder to name. So he carried it quietly through the week. He went to work, answered emails, sat through meetings where people argued passionately about fonts and timelines. He smiled at the right moments. He nodded when spoken to. On the surface, he looked like a man whose life was functioning exactly as designed. Inside, he felt stalled. By Wednesday night, the weight of it pushed him into action. Not a dramatic one, just a necessary one. He texted Marcus. Beer? The reply came immediately. Obviously. They met at a neighborhood bar that had never pretended to be cool. The chairs were mismatched, the lighting was forgiving, and the bartender remembered Marcus's order without asking. Marcus slid a beer across the table as Daryl sat down. You look like a man who's been thinking instead of sleeping, Marcus said. Thinking's cheaper, Daryl replied. Marcus snorted. That bad, huh? Daryl took a long sip before answering. I think Tina and I want different things, he said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You just now figured that out? Daryl winced. You noticed. I noticed 6 months ago, Marcus said. You stopped saying we when you talked about plans. Daryl stared into his glass. I thought I was giving her space. You were, Marcus said. But there's a difference between space and vacancy. Daryl glanced up. That sounded rehearsed. Marcus shrugged. I've been waiting. They drank in silence for a moment. She's not doing anything wrong, Daryl said. That's the problem. If she were cruel or dishonest, this would be easier. Marcus nodded. But she's just herself. Exactly. So what do you want? Marcus asked. Daryl didn't answer immediately. He'd been circling that question for months, afraid that saying it out loud would turn it into a demand. I want to feel like I'm building something with someone who's also building, he said. Not someone who's just passing through. Marcus leaned back. Have you told her that? Yes. And she says she doesn't want to be measured. Marcus frowned. Everyone's measured by time whether they like it or not. That's what I said. Marcus smiled. She doesn't want to fail your expectations. I don't want her to, Daryl said. I just don't want to pretend expectations don't exist. Marcus lifted his beer. So what's stopping you from walking away? Daryl hesitated. Hope, he said. Marcus nodded slowly. That's a dangerous thing when it's one-sided. 2 nights later, Daryl found himself at dinner with his sister Elaine. She listened carefully as he talked, her expression thoughtful rather than sympathetic. So, she said finally, you're waiting for her to want what you want. I'm waiting to see if she ever will. Elaine tilted her head. How long? Daryl didn't answer. That's not patience, she continued. That's suspension. He frowned. What's the difference? Patience has movement, Elaine said. Suspension just hangs there. Daryl sat back, absorbing that. She's happy, he said. I don't want to take that from her. Elaine smiled gently. You're not that powerful. He laughed despite himself. But you're also allowed to want happiness that includes you, she added. That night, driving home, Daryl replayed the conversations in his head. Not as advice, but as mirrors. Everyone seemed to be seeing the same thing he was struggling to admit. He wasn't being too demanding. He was being too accommodating. Saturday afternoon, Tina called. Hey, she said brightly. What are you up to? Just finished some errands, Daryl replied. What's going on? Well, she said, drawing the word out. Marissa invited me to this pop-up thing tonight. Food trucks, live music, that sort of vibe. Sounds fun, he said. It is, she agreed. I was thinking I might go. Daryl waited. With them, she added. Obviously. He closed his eyes briefly. Okay, he said. You're being weird, Tina said. How so? You're doing that calm voice thing. This is just my voice. No, it's not. You're distant. Daryl leaned against the kitchen counter. He was tired of translating himself, of pretending this didn't matter. I don't think I want to keep doing this, he said. There it was. Simple. Honest. Terrifying. Doing what? Tina asked, her tone shifting. Waiting, he said. For something you don't even know if you want. She was quiet for a moment. Are you breaking up with me? She asked. I don't know, he said. I'm trying not to waste either of our time. That's dramatic. Is it? She sighed. I told you I don't want to plan my whole life. I'm not asking for your whole life, he said. I'm asking for intention. Why does everything have to be so serious with you? Because time passes whether we talk about it or not, he thought. Out loud, he said. Because I don't want to wake up 3 years from now and realize I've been optional. You're not optional, Tina said quickly. Then treat me like I'm essential. The silence stretched. I just feel like you're trying to rush me into something, she said finally. And I feel like I'm slowing myself down for you, he replied. Neither accusation felt unfair. Tina, Daryl said, softer now. I love you, but I can't keep pretending this isn't hurting me. She swallowed. I don't want to lose you. Then meet me halfway. I don't know how, she whispered. That, more than anything else, told him what he needed to know. Take the night, he said. Go to your thing. Have fun. And you? I'll be here, he said. After they hung up, Daryl stood alone in his kitchen, the quiet pressing in. He realized something then with a clarity that surprised him. He'd been patient for 2 years. But patience, when stretched too far, stops being generous. It becomes self-neglect. And he wasn't willing to keep paying that price. Chapter 5, the night at Tips, the pop-up event Tina mentioned turned out to be impossible to avoid. Daryl didn't know that when he left his apartment Saturday evening with the modest goal of buying groceries and salvaging the night with a decent meal. He certainly didn't expect to run into Tina under a string of warm lights, surrounded by food trucks and music that pulsed just loud enough to make conversation feel intimate. He noticed her laugh first. It cut through the noise, bright and unguarded. The laugh she used when she wasn't monitoring herself. By the time he saw her, she was already mid-story, drink in hand, body angled toward a group of coworkers clustered around a tall table. Daryl stopped walking. For a moment, he considered turning around. There was no obligation to step into this scene. He hadn't been invited. He hadn't planned on being here. He could leave with his dignity intact and his questions unanswered. Instead, he stayed where he was. Not because he wanted to catch her doing something wrong, he didn't, but because this, he realized, was the truest version of the thing he'd been trying to understand. Tina in her element. Tina in motion. Tina without him. She looked radiant, comfortable, fully present. Someone said something that made the group laugh, and Tina leaned forward, touching a man's arm briefly. Not flirtatious, just familiar. The kind of contact that came from shared context. Daryl felt the oddest thing then. Not jealousy, distance. Like watching a show he used to be part of, now unfolding without his character. Tina, the word slipped out before he decided to speak. Her head snapped up. Surprise flickered across her face, followed quickly by something harder to read. Oh, she said. Hey. The group turned, curiosity lighting their faces. Hi, Daryl said, stepping closer. Didn't know this was happening here. Tina's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Yeah, kind of last minute. I was just grabbing groceries, he lied, the flimsy excuse hovering uselessly between them. Didn't expect to see you. She nodded. Well, here I am. An awkward pause settled. Guys, Tina said, gesturing vaguely. This is Daryl. She hesitated. My boyfriend. The word landed with a thud. There it was. Not wrong. Just delayed. A chorus of greetings followed. Polite smiles. One woman said, nice to finally meet you, with an emphasis that suggested Tina talked about him less than she claimed. Daryl smiled back, friendly, measured. Nice to meet you all, he said. Sorry to interrupt. You're not interrupting, Tina said quickly. We were just about to grab another round. Daryl glanced at the table. Empty cups, wallets already out. A rhythm established long before he arrived. Don't let me stop you, he said. One of the men, Tyler, maybe, grinned. You should join us. Tina looked at Daryl then, searching his face. He understood the moment instantly. This was the test he'd never asked for. The choice she hadn't realized she'd been postponing. Join or observe. Include or continue. That's okay, Daryl said gently. I don't want to crash your night. You're not crashing, Tina said. But there was uncertainty now. I really was just passing through, he added. I'll let you get back to it. He turned to go before she could argue, before the group could make space that felt performative instead of natural. Daryl, Tina called. He stopped. She walked over, stepping just out of the circle of light and noise. The music thumped behind them, distant but insistent. Why are you doing this? She asked. Doing what? This, she said, gesturing vaguely between them. Being weird. He smiled sadly. I'm not being weird. I'm being honest with myself. That's not fair, she said again. It had become her refrain. Maybe not, he said. But it's necessary. She crossed her arms. So you're just going to leave? I was never really here, he replied quietly. Her expression faltered. That's not true. Isn't it? He asked. Look around, Tina. This is your life. It's full. It's loud. It's moving. And I don't fit into it unless I force myself in. You could fit, she said. You just don't want to. He shook his head. I don't want to beg. She swallowed. No one's asking you to. Then why does it feel like I'm always waiting to be invited? The music surged as the band hit a chorus. Laughter erupted behind them. Tina looked over her shoulder, then back at him. This isn't the time, she said. Can we not do this right now? When would be a good time? He asked. She didn't answer. I'm not angry, Daryl said, softer now. I'm just done pretending this doesn't hurt. Her eyes shone, whether from emotion or the lights he couldn't tell. I don't want to lose you, she said again. He believed her. That was the hardest part. I don't want to lose myself, he replied. They stood there, the space between them suddenly vast. So what? She said, voice tight. You're breaking up with me in the middle of a food truck festival? He almost laughed. No, I'm choosing not to keep going in circles. That sounds like a breakup. Maybe it is, he said. Or maybe it's the moment we stop lying about what this is. She shook her head. I didn't know loving someone came with deadlines. It doesn't, he said. But building a life does. Silence stretched. Then Tina exhaled, long and shaky. I can't give you what you're asking for, she said. Daryl nodded. The words didn't surprise him anymore. Then we should stop asking each other to be different people, he said. She wiped at her eye, frustrated. I hate this. I know. They stood there another second, suspended. I should go, he said. She nodded, unable to look at him. As Daryl walked away, the night swallowed him quickly. Music, laughter, the smell of fried food and sugar. He moved through it like a ghost, unseen and unneeded. By the time he reached his car, something inside him had settled. Not happiness, not relief, resolution. He sat behind the wheel for a moment, hands resting loosely, heart heavy but clear. The relationship hadn't ended because someone failed. It ended because it had tipped, slowly, quietly, into truth. And for the first time in months, Daryl felt aligned with himself, even if it meant being alone. Chapter 6. After the quiet, the morning after felt deceptively calm. Daryl woke to sunlight filtering through the blinds, the room filled with the ordinary sounds of life continuing. Cars passing, someone walking a dog, a neighbor closing a door too loudly. For a brief, disorienting moment, he expected to reach for his phone and see a message from Tina. Something light, something apologetic, something that would allow them to pretend the night before had been a misunderstanding. There was nothing. He lay there longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, cataloging the sensation of absence. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't dramatic. It was a low, steady ache, like the echo of a sound that had already stopped. When he finally sat up, the quiet followed him. No toothbrush beside his. No familiar mug in the sink. No mental calculation about what time she'd be leaving, whether she'd had coffee yet, if he should text or wait. The relief unsettled him. He moved through the morning slowly, shower, coffee, toast he barely tasted. Each action felt slightly unreal, as though he were inhabiting a version of his life that hadn't fully loaded yet. Around 10, his phone buzzed. Tina. He stared at the name until the screen dimmed. Then he answered. Hey, she said, her voice cautious, stripped of its usual brightness. Hey, he replied. A pause stretched between them, heavy with everything neither of them wanted to say first. I didn't sleep much, Tina said. Me neither. Another pause. I keep replaying last night, she continued. I hate how it happened. I don't think there was a version that would have felt good, Daryl said. She exhaled. I guess not. I don't regret being honest, he added. I regret that it hurt you. Her voice softened. I don't think you were trying to hurt me. No. I just wish it didn't feel so final. Daryl leaned against the counter, closing his eyes. Does it feel final to you? He asked. She hesitated. I don't know. He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. That's kind of the point. Silence again. I miss you already, Tina said quietly. The words landed harder than he expected. Not because they were surprising, but because they were sincere. I miss you too, he said. But missing someone isn't the same as moving toward them. That sounds like something you've been practicing, she said, attempting humor. Unfortunately, she was quiet for a moment. I don't think I can give you what you need, she said finally. Not without feeling like I'm betraying myself. Daryl swallowed. And I don't think I can keep asking without doing the same. They sat with that truth together, unadorned. So, this is it, she said. Yes, he replied gently. I don't want us to hate each other. I don't either. I don't, she repeated, firmer now. You matter to me. You always will. He felt a tightness in his chest, sharp but clean. You matter to me too, he said. That's why I couldn't keep pretending. She let out a small, broken laugh. You always were the braver one. I don't think this is bravery, he said. I think it's alignment. God, she muttered. You and your words. He smiled faintly. Take care of yourself, Tina. You too, Daryl. The call ended without ceremony. Daryl stood there for a long moment, phone still in his hand, letting the quiet settle into its new shape. The days that followed moved strangely, too fast and too slow all at once. He told Marcus, who responded with a long silence and a single, emphatic nod. He told Elaine, who hugged him tightly and said, I'm proud of you, in a way that made his throat ache. He didn't tell many others. The story didn't feel like it belonged to an audience. At work, he was functional but distracted. He caught himself almost texting Tina about small things, a ridiculous meeting, a song on the radio, then stopping, phone hovering uselessly in his hand. He deleted her contact on Thursday, not out of anger, out of necessity. That night, he went for a walk, letting the cool air burn off the restlessness he couldn't quite place. He passed restaurants they'd eaten at, bars they ducked into on rainy nights. Each place held a version of them that no longer existed. It hurt, but the hurt was clean. There was no second guessing, no wondering if he'd imagined the misalignment, no looping arguments in his head, trying to find the right phrasing that might have changed things. The truth had finally been spoken aloud. It had weight, but it also had clarity. On Sunday afternoon, Daryl sat alone in his apartment, sunlight pooling on the floor. He realized he hadn't checked his phone in nearly an hour. The absence no longer felt like a loss, felt like space. He thought about the 2 years he'd spent loving Tina. Not desperately, not recklessly, but sincerely. He didn't regret that. Loving her had taught him what it felt like to show up consistently, to be patient, to give someone room to be fully themselves. It had also taught him where his own edges were. He hadn't been wrong to wait, but he would have been wrong to wait forever. That evening, he cooked a proper meal for the first time in weeks, playing music too loud, letting himself take up the whole apartment. He ate at the small kitchen table alone, noticing how different it felt without the careful modulation of another person's presence. It wasn't lonely. It was honest. Before bed, he opened his laptop and pulled up a document he hadn't touched in a while. Notes about things he wanted someday. Not plans exactly. Directions. Ideas about the life he wanted to build, the kind of partnership that would feel mutual instead of negotiated. He added a line near the top. Someone who chooses me without hesitation. He closed the laptop and sat back, surprised by the steadiness he felt. The relationship hadn't ended in flames or betrayal. It had ended in recognition. And while grief still lived somewhere in his chest, it no longer dominated the room. For the first time in a long while, Daryl wasn't waiting. He was moving forward, even if he didn't yet know where he was headed. Chapter 7, A Better Alignment. The first thing Daryl noticed was how quiet his mind had become. Not empty, just quieter. The constant internal negotiation that had shaped his days for so long had finally gone still. He no longer rehearsed conversations that might happen or reinterpreted ones that already had. His thoughts moved forward instead of sideways. It took time to trust that feeling. Weeks passed. Spring leaned fully into the city, trees greening with enthusiasm, patios reopening like invitations. Daryl filled his days deliberately. Not frantically, not in an attempt to replace anything, but with the calm intention of someone reacquainting himself with his own life. He started saying yes to things without calculating who he needed to check in with first. He joined Marcus and a few others for trivia night. He visited Elaine on a Sunday afternoon just because. He went to the gym at odd hours, took longer walks, cooked meals that required more than one pan. The loneliness came and went like weather. When it arrived, he didn't fight it. He acknowledged it, let it pass. What surprised him was how often relief followed close behind. One Saturday morning, he found himself at a bookstore he hadn't visited in years. It was the kind of place that smelled faintly of dust and paper and optimism, with handwritten recommendation cards tucked beneath the shelves. Daryl wandered without purpose, pulling books down, skimming first pages, letting curiosity rather than obligation guide him. You're holding that upside down. The voice was warm, amused, not intrusive. He turned. The woman standing beside him had a stack of books balanced against her hip and a smile that suggested she wasn't embarrassed by the observation, just genuinely entertained by it. I was testing myself, Daryl said, seeing if the words would reorganize out of sympathy. She laughed. Bold strategy. He righted the book. I guess I failed. Or succeeded at starting a conversation, she said, extending a hand. I'm Hannah. Daryl. They shook hands. The contact was brief, easy, uncharged by expectation. What are you looking for? Hannah asked. He glanced at the shelves, then back at her. Honestly, something that doesn't feel like homework. She nodded approvingly. Fiction section, third aisle. Avoid anything with the word journey in the description. I trust you implicitly, he said. Good, she replied. I take book recommendations very seriously. They walked together, falling into conversation with surprising ease. Hannah worked in urban planning, something Daryl admitted he knew very little about, but she spoke with enthusiasm that made even zoning regulations sound faintly heroic. And you? She asked, selecting a book and handing it to him without ceremony. Project management, he said, which sounds boring until something goes wrong. Then everyone suddenly cares. She grinned. Ah, chaos shepherd. Exactly. They lingered longer than necessary, swapping favorites, occasionally drifting apart and reconvening with new finds. Eventually, Hannah checked her phone. I should probably go, she said. I promised myself I wouldn't spend my entire Saturday inside. Fair, Daryl said. He hesitated, then decided to trust the steadiness he felt. Would you want to grab coffee sometime? She smiled, not surprised, not calculating. I'd like that, she said. They exchanged numbers. No flourish. No urgency. As Hannah left, Daryl realized something with a quiet startle. He hadn't once wondered what this meant. Their first coffee happened 3 days later, not because either of them rushed it, but because their schedules happened to align. The cafe was small and sunlit, the kind of place where conversations overlapped comfortably. They talked about books, work, favorite neighborhoods, the strange intimacy of sharing space with strangers. So, Hannah said at one point, stirring her coffee, what brings you back to the bookstore after years away? Daryl considered the question. He could have offered a vague answer. He didn't. I got out of a long relationship recently, he said. I realized I'd been living on autopilot. Hannah nodded, unflinching. That'll do it. What about you? He asked. Similar, she said. Different details. Same realization. They shared a look, not heavy, not loaded. Just mutual recognition. What did you learn? Hannah asked. Daryl thought about it. That I'm not as patient as I thought, he said. Or maybe I am, but only when it's moving somewhere. She smiled. That sounds healthy. Does it? It does to me. There was no awkward silence after that. No sudden shift in tone. They finished their coffee, lingered a bit longer, then parted with an easy promise to do it again. Over the next few weeks, they did. They walked through neighborhoods neither of them knew well. They tried restaurants on a whim. They sat on a park bench one evening, watching the light fade, talking about nothing and everything. What struck Daryl most was how little effort it took. He didn't feel like he was auditioning. He didn't feel like he was waiting for permission to exist in her life. When Hannah talked about her friends or her work, she spoke as if space were assumed, not granted. You should come with us next time, she said once, referring to a group hike she mentioned in passing. Not an invitation dangling uncertainly. A statement of inclusion. He noticed the difference immediately. One evening, weeks in, they found themselves cooking dinner together at Hannah's place. There was music playing, windows open, the kind of domestic ease that had once felt so loaded. Now it felt light. You're very calm, Hannah said, watching him chop vegetables. Is that good or bad? Good, she said. I like calm. He smiled. So do I. They ate at a small table, laughing when something burned slightly, sharing stories that didn't feel like disclosures so much as exchanges. At one point, Hannah set her fork down. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. What are you looking for? She asked. Not in general. Just here. Daryl appreciated the directness. No subtext. No guessing. I'm looking for something mutual, he said. Not rushed. Not vague. Just chosen. She considered that. I can work with that, she said. He felt it then, not fireworks, not certainty, but alignment. The quiet click of two things fitting without force. Later, as he walked home under a sky bruised with evening, Daryl replayed the night. Not to analyze it, but to savor it. He thought about Tina, not with bitterness but with clarity. She had loved him in the ways she could. He had loved her in the ways he knew how. Neither of them had been wrong. They'd just been misaligned. What he felt now wasn't a replacement. It was something new. And it felt like forward motion. Chapter 8, The Life That Includes Him. The thing Daryl learned last was also the simplest. Love didn't feel loud when it was right. Felt steady. Summer arrived without ceremony. Weeks folded into each other gently, marked not by milestones but by continuity. Hannah didn't announce her presence in his life with grand gestures or declarations. She just kept showing up, in ways that felt natural rather than negotiated. They made plans without prefacing them with disclaimers. They adjusted without resentment. They included each other without keeping score. One evening, Daryl noticed it while standing in Hannah's kitchen, drying dishes while she leaned against the counter, talking about a community meeting that had gone long. She spoke with animation, irritation, humor, all of it directed at him without effort, without checking whether he was following or interested. He was, not because he forced himself to be, but because he was already there, inside the story as it unfolded. And then, Hannah said, laughing, this guy actually suggested we move the entire bike lane because it felt inconvenient. Daryl raised an eyebrow. To the bikes. To the concept of bikes, she said. He was very clear. He laughed, shaking his head. She watched him for a moment, then said, you know, my friends are doing a game night Friday. You should come. No pause. No caveat. Yeah, he said. I'd like that. And he meant it without hesitation. The game night was chaotic in the best way. Too many people, overlapping conversations, rules explained poorly and then abandoned entirely. Daryl found himself pulled into the rhythm of it quickly, teased gently by people who seemed already prepared to like him. At one point, Hannah disappeared into the kitchen, and someone handed Daryl a drink. So how long have you two been together? A woman asked casually. Daryl glanced toward the kitchen, where Hannah was laughing with someone he didn't know. Not that long, he said. The woman smiled knowingly. Feels longer, though. He considered that. It feels present, he said finally. Later that night, as they walked home together, Hannah slipped her hand into his without comment. You were great tonight, she said. Your friends are kind, he replied. They like you. He smiled. That was fast. They're efficient. They walked in comfortable silence for a block. Can I tell you something? Hannah asked. Always. I really appreciate how clear you are, she said. About what you want. About where you are. Daryl nodded. I learned the hard way. She squeezed his hand. Sometimes that's the only way. The thought of Tina still surfaced now and then, not as a wound but as a reference point. Daryl no longer wondered what might have happened if he'd waited longer or asked differently. The question had lost its urgency. He hadn't failed. He'd listened. One afternoon, months later, he found himself back at the farmer's market. This time, Hannah walked beside him, pausing to examine flowers while he held their place in line for coffee. Do we need bread? She asked. We have half a loaf, he said. That's basically nothing. He laughed. You sound familiar. She smiled at him, unbothered. I have strong bread opinions. They bought bread. As they sat at a small metal table, coffee warming their hands, Hannah leaned back and sighed contentedly. I like this, she said. This? Daryl asked. Us, she replied. The pace, the direction. He felt the words settle easily, without pressure. So do I, he said. She studied him for a moment, then asked, do you ever miss your old relationship? The question wasn't sharp. It was curious. Sometimes, Daryl said honestly. I missed the person I thought we were becoming. And now I'm more interested in who we actually are. She smiled. That's a good answer. He smiled back. I've had practice. That evening, back at his apartment, Daryl stood at the window, watching the city settle into night. Hannah was curled up on the couch behind him, reading, the quiet presence of her filling the room without demanding anything. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago, careful, patient, waiting for a future to clarify itself. He hadn't been wrong to want what he wanted. He just needed someone who wanted it too. Hannah looked up from her book. What are you thinking about? He turned to her. Alignment, he said. She laughed. That sounds serious. It's actually very simple, he said, sitting beside her. I want a life that includes me. She closed her book and leaned into him. Good. I already planned on it. He wrapped an arm around her, the moment fitting without adjustment. For the first time in a long while, Daryl wasn't measuring time or guarding space or waiting for permission to belong. He was exactly where he was meant to be. Not ahead. Not behind. Just moving forward, together. Epilogue. 1 year later, Daryl Jones stood in a kitchen that no longer felt provisional. Sunlight spilled across the counter in the late afternoon way he'd come to recognize as the day's quiet hinge. Work finished, evening not yet begun. The windows were open. Somewhere down the block, someone practiced the same 3 guitar chords over and over, earnest and terrible. Hannah sat at the small table, laptop open, hair twisted up with a pen she would forget was there until it fell. She was reviewing notes for a neighborhood planning meeting, occasionally muttering comments that sounded suspiciously like arguments she'd already won in her head. Do you think, she said without looking up, that anyone has ever said, I love a bike lane, and meant it sarcastically? Daryl smiled as he rinsed vegetables at the sink. I think you might be the first. She glanced up, grinning. History in the making. They'd moved into the apartment together 6 months earlier, after a series of small decisions that stacked neatly instead of teetering. No grand announcement. No countdown. Just a shared sense that it made sense logistically, emotionally, practically. Aligned. Daryl chopped onions, thinking, not for the first time, about how little effort that alignment required. Not because relationships were effortless, but because this one didn't demand that he shrink or wait or translate himself into something more palatable. He was simply here. Did you email the landlord about the leaky faucet? Hannah asked. I did, he said. He said he'd send someone. Define someone. Define send. She laughed and went back to her screen. Later, as they cooked together, Hannah leaned into him briefly, absent-minded, the way people do when they're not performing closeness, just inhabiting it. Daryl felt the familiar warmth settle in his chest, steady and unremarkable in the best way. They ate dinner on the couch that night, plates balanced carefully, a documentary playing half ignored. At one point, Hannah rested her head against his shoulder. Hey, she said. Hey, do you remember when we met? He smiled. You mocked me for holding a book upside down. I did no such thing, she said. I gently corrected you. Heroically. She laughed. You seemed calm. I was terrified, he admitted. Liar. Okay. I was calm because I'd finally stopped running ahead of myself. She turned to look at him. What do you mean? Daryl considered his answer. A year ago, he might have over-explained. Now, he trusted that she could meet him where he stood. I used to think wanting clarity made me demanding, he said. Like I was asking for too much too soon. And now I think clarity is just kindness with a spine. Hannah smiled softly. I like that. She shifted, settling more comfortably. I've been thinking about next spring. He waited, not bracing, not wary, just present. My firm wants to expand the pilot program, she continued. There's talk of a year-long assignment. Same city. More responsibility. That's great, he said immediately, and meant it. I want to do it, she said. But I wanted to tell you before I said yes. Not permission. Inclusion. I'm in, he said. Whatever that looks like. She studied his face. You don't even know what it looks like. He shrugged. We'll figure it out together. That was new. That was everything. On a quiet Sunday not long after, Daryl ran into Tina by accident. It happened at the farmer's market, of all places, the same one where lines had once been drawn in pencil. He saw her first, reaching for apples, hair shorter now, posture familiar and strange all at once. He didn't feel the jolt he'd once imagined he would. Just recognition. Tina, he said before he could overthink it. She turned, surprised, then smiled. Daryl. Hi. They stood there for a moment, neither rushing to fill the space. How are you? She asked. Good, he said. Really good. She nodded. You look it. You too. She hesitated, then gestured at his coffee cup. Still coming here for the bread? He smiled. Always. They chatted briefly, updates exchanged without excavation. She told him she'd moved departments, taken a class, traveled more intentionally. He told her about Hannah, about the apartment, about the quiet ways life had expanded. I'm glad, Tina said finally, and this time there was no edge to it. You found what you were looking for. Daryl shook his head gently. I stopped pretending I didn't know what I wanted. She smiled, rueful but sincere. That sounds right. They parted easily. No ache followed. Just closure settling where confusion used to live. That evening, Daryl told Hannah about the encounter as they walked home, hands brushing occasionally in the crowd. How did it feel? She asked. Clean, he said. Like something that finished instead of something that broke. She nodded. I'm glad. So was he. Later, as they got ready for bed, Hannah paused in the doorway. Hey, she said. Yeah. I know we don't need to label everything, she said, thoughtful. But I want you to know. I'm not going anywhere. Daryl felt the words land with quiet certainty. I know, he said. And I'm here because I want to be. Not because I'm waiting for something else. She crossed the room and kissed him. Unhurried, certain. When the lights were out and the city settled into its nighttime murmur, Daryl lay awake for a moment, listening to Hannah's steady breathing beside him. He thought about the year behind him, the ending that had hurt, the space that had followed, the alignment that had grown without fanfare. He thought about how easily he now recognized what belonged in his life. Not because it was perfect, but because it included him. 1 year later, Daryl Jones wasn't ahead of his life or behind it. He was inside it. And that finally was enough.